Marcus Aurelius didn't live in a quiet time. He ruled over the most powerful empire the world had known, yet he often wrote to himself as if he were a simple man, trying only to master his own mind. In the midst of war, political pressure, plague, and betrayal, this man, an emperor, still found the strength each morning to sit down and write reflections in his private journal. That journal would later be known as Meditations. But it wasn't meant for us, it was meant for him. And maybe that's why it speaks so clearly to us. Because deep down, we're not looking for another voice telling us what to do. We're looking for one that helps us return to what we already know, that our peace, our strength, our clarity, none of it comes from the world outside. It comes from within. Picture him, a man in his 50s, shoulders worn by the weight of an empire, staring out into the early Roman light before the city fully wakes. He writes not as a king, but as a student. When you arise in the morning, he writes, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. These words weren't a speech. They were a reminder, a discipline, a code he returned to daily, not because he had mastered life, but because he was still learning how to live it. And here's the thing, we're not so different. You may not wear a crown or command armies, but you carry burdens. You face noise, distraction, disappointment. You wake each day to responsibilities that sometimes feel heavier than you can bear. And maybe, like Marcus, you're trying to find something that steadies you, a code to live by, not one made of empty motivation or artificial calm, but one that demands inner work, a real philosophy. That's what Stoicism offers. And Marcus Aurelius, perhaps more than anyone, shows us what it means to apply it every day in the dirt and sweat of real life. He didn't theorize from a mountaintop. He practiced Stoicism in the chaos of battlefields, courtrooms, and the quiet torment of loss. So what did this man come back to each day? What did his daily code look like? Not in theory, but in practice. Let's walk through his life together, not as an academic exercise, but like we're walking beside him through those Roman corridors, learning the principles that shaped his mind. Because in learning how he stood firm in storms, maybe we'll remember how to do the same. Have you ever felt like the world is spinning faster than you can keep up? That the moment you finally find peace, something jerks it out from under you? That's not a modern problem. Marcus faced it too. In fact, one of his generals once betrayed him in the middle of a war. His close friend Cassius claimed the throne and sparked civil unrest. You'd expect rage. You'd expect revenge. But Marcus didn't react like a man possessed. He responded like a man trained. He wrote to himself, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." This wasn't denial, it was clear. The ability to separate what's within our control from what isn't. The Stoics call this the dichotomy of control. But for Marcus, it was more than a concept. It was survival. It meant that even when someone tried to take everything from him, they couldn't touch his inner fortress. That's what he had been building, day after day. A place inside him that no betrayal, no lie, no shifting political current could reach. That's the invitation Stoicism gives you, to step back from the noise, not to retreat, but to remember what you can govern and who you really are. Imagine for a second that your peace is a fire, and every complaint, every petty insult, every missed expectation is just a gust of wind. The fire doesn't scream at the wind, it just burns anyway. Now ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped letting every passing annoyance control your state? If you started practicing, like Marcus did, the art of not being pulled by every emotion, every opinion, every loss. That kind of stillness, it doesn't just show up, it's forged. But Marcus didn't just endure hardship, he embraced responsibility. He understood that being in power didn't give him permission to be soft. It demanded more discipline, not less. And he held himself to a brutal kind of honesty. He often reminded himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That wasn't morbid, it was freeing, because when you remember that time is short, you waste less of it. You stop pretending you have forever to say the truth, to fix that relationship, to get your health right, to show up as the man you claim to be. For Marcus, death wasn't a reason to fear, it was a reason to live awake. When was the last time you truly lived like your time mattered? Not out of panic, but out of presence. Sometimes it's not new knowledge we need, but a new relationship with time, and Marcus knew clarity begins when we remember how finite we are, that the moment right in front of us is the only thing that's ever real. And still, even with that awareness, Marcus fell. He got angry. He felt overwhelmed. He wanted to escape. But instead of running from those emotions, he examined them. He would write to himself things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't trying to suppress his emotions. He was learning to observe them, to sit with anger and ask, what story am I telling myself? To feel fear and ask, is this about what's real or what I imagine? That's what makes Stoicism different from toxic positivity. It doesn't ask you to fake a smile. It asks you to look deeper until you find the root of what's shaking you. Maybe you've been taught that strength is about holding it all in. But Marcus teaches something deeper, that strength is about mastering what's within you so that what's outside of you loses its power. Think about how rare that is in today's world. We're surrounded by outrage, quick reactions, performative anger, but the Stoic path is different. It's slower, more deliberate, less flashy, and far more powerful. You might expect that someone who wrote so often about virtue would be arrogant, but that's what makes Marcus different. He didn't think he was better than anyone else. In fact, he reminded himself constantly that he was just one man, made of the same flesh and breath as the people he ruled. He called himself a little soul carrying around a corpse. And it wasn't self-loathing. It was humility, a radical kind of self-awareness. He knew that ego is the enemy of reason. That pride blinds you to your own weaknesses, so he fought every day, not just to lead others, but to rule himself. That's the kind of power most people never touch. He didn't need to win arguments. He needed to win his own attention, to stay focused on what mattered most. And for Marcus, that meant living in alignment, not just thinking about virtue, but acting it out in how he spoke, how he judged, how he forgave. Not perfectly, but persistently. He would write to himself, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. He wasn't interested in performance. He was interested in embodiment, because to him, philosophy wasn't a set of beliefs. It was a way of walking, and every step either brought him closer to his principles or further away from them. Pause here for a second. When you look at your own day, your own decisions, are you arguing with life or are you living it? Are you trying to appear a certain way or are you quietly becoming someone you respect? Because that difference between appearing and becoming is where peace is born. What made Marcus Aurelius powerful wasn't the Roman legions. It wasn't his title. It was his ability to stay grounded, to keep choosing discipline even when nobody was watching, especially then. And he knew on a deep level that pain was part of the path. That discomfort wasn't the enemy. He said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. It sounds poetic now, but for him, it was literal. When war broke out, he didn't see it as unfair. When illness took those he loved, he didn't see it as cruelty. He saw it all as material for virtue. Fire tests gold. Trials test character. The Stoics believed that adversity wasn't just a part of life. It was the forge in which your soul is shaped. That means your problems, the very ones you wish would go away, are the exact things that could develop your strength if you choose to meet them with courage. So let me ask you something difficult. What if your pain isn't punishment, but preparation? What if the chaos you're facing right now is carving out the version of you that you've been praying for? Marcus never romanticized life. He saw it for what it was: brutal, brief, unpredictable. But that clarity didn't make him cold. It made him focused. He trained his mind to see things as they are, not worse than they are. When his mind wandered into fear or despair, he pulled it back with truth. You have been made by nature for endurance, he reminded himself. He didn't mean physical toughness alone. He meant the kind of inner resilience that doesn't flinch when reality disappoints you. The kind of patience that can stay still when everything around you screams for a reaction. Because that's what Stoicism is at its core. Not detachment from life, but mastery of response. You still feel, you still care, you still hurt, but you are no longer at the mercy of every emotion. You learn to pause, to choose, to hold your power when it's most tempting to give it away. Have you ever noticed how the most grounded people are the ones who've been through the most? That's not an accident. It's the result of facing storms, not running from them, of walking through fire and letting it purify, not destroy. One of Marcus's greatest strengths was his refusal to blame others, even when they were clearly wrong, even when they betrayed him. He reminded himself again and again that what others do is not up to him, but how he responds, that is his full responsibility. He wrote, "When another blames you or hates you or people voice similar criticisms, go to their souls, penetrate inside, and see what sort of people they are. You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety that they hold any particular opinion about you." Can you feel the weight of that? That your peace doesn't depend on being understood or liked or praised. That you are free the moment you stop tying your mood to someone else's behavior. It's not easy, but it is powerful. What would it feel like to no longer fear being misunderstood? To stop negotiating your worth through the mirror of other people's opinions? That freedom, it's not out of reach. It's built moment by moment in silence, when you choose to remain steady in the face of noise. And even in silence, Marcus wasn't idle. He meditated on his values daily, repeated his beliefs until they became muscle memory. His writing wasn't decoration, it was discipline, a training ground for the mind. Because the mind, like the body, must be trained to respond under pressure. He didn't wait for peace to arrive. He practiced it, especially when it felt far away. That's why his words still reach across centuries, not because he wrote as a philosopher, but because he lived like a man who refused to let the outside world define who he would be. He trained for life the way a warrior trains for battle, one slow, deliberate breath at a time. There's a quiet moment almost every morning when the light begins to shift and the world hasn't fully woken up. Marcus knew the value of this hour, not for productivity, not for achievement, but for returning to yourself. He would sit and ask himself the same questions. Am I in control of my mind? Am I acting according to reason or impulse? Am I doing the work of a man or am I lost in distraction? These weren't abstract philosophical puzzles. These were the checkpoints of a warrior preparing for the day. A man who knew that the biggest battles wouldn't come from enemies outside, but from the ones within: resentment, self-pity, vanity, fear. He reminded himself that it was easy to look virtuous when things were calm. But the true test of philosophy wasn't how you spoke in comfort. It was how you held yourself in chaos. That's why his journal wasn't filled with grand ideas. It was filled with reminders. Return to the present. Do what is right. Let go of what you cannot control. Because Marcus understood a simple truth. In repetition, there is transformation. You don't become disciplined by thinking once. You become disciplined by choosing it again and again and again. Have you noticed how often we chase something, success, attention, control, only to find it slips through our fingers the tighter we grip it? Maybe that's the lesson, that what's real doesn't need to be forced, that strength isn't about clenching, but releasing what never truly belonged to us. There's something powerful about watching a man walk through life without rushing. Marcus wasn't passive, but he wasn't frantic either. He believed that each person is assigned a role by nature, and the work is not to fight that role, but to fulfill it honorably. In other words, purpose isn't found by sprinting. It's found by standing still long enough to listen, and that's exactly what Marcus did. He listened to nature, to his conscience, to the still voice within that whispered what was right, even when it was hard. When he lost people he loved, he grieved, but he didn't collapse. He reminded himself, loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. That's not cold, that's clarity. He understood that nothing we have, no relationship, no title, no possession, is truly ours. Everything is borrowed. And when it's returned, we don't curse the sky. We bow, we breathe, and we move forward, because grief doesn't have to break you. It can mature you. It can sharpen you. It can strip away illusion and leave behind only what's real. When life takes something from you, do you curse it? Or do you ask what it came to teach you? That question alone can change everything, because pain that is examined can become wisdom, but pain that is resisted becomes suffering. Marcus wasn't numb. He felt deeply, but he trained himself not to become ruled by those feelings. He spoke often of the logos, the rational order of the universe, and tried to align his actions with it. That meant doing his duty even when he was tired, staying composed when he was insulted, speaking truth even when it wasn't popular. There's a kind of quiet nobility in that, the strength to be unmoved, not because you don't care, but because you care about the right things, about character, about duty, about living a life that could stand the weight of its own reflection. Imagine the calm of that, waking each day not to impress, not to chase, but to serve, to be useful, to show up as a man whose presence brings order, not chaos. That's what Marcus trained himself for. That's what Stoicism builds, not a perfect man, but a sturdy one. What would change in your life if your first priority each day wasn't comfort or success, but virtue? What if you measured your day not by how much you got done, but by how you carried yourself in the doing? Marcus once wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being." That may sound simple, but it's radical, because it reframes life, not as an obstacle, but as a calling. Your work isn't just your job. Your real work is to be a man, to rise, to move, to contribute. Not because you feel like it, but because that's what you were made for. He didn't see life as something that owed him comfort. He saw it as something that gave him an opportunity. Each moment was a test, each interaction a mirror, and each challenge a chance to become a better version of himself. This wasn't passive acceptance, it was active engagement, with reality, with truth, with duty. And that's where Marcus found joy, not in luxury, not in escape, but in simple things done with presence. A good conversation, a well-written sentence, a moment of clarity in the middle of political storms. If you stripped away the noise, the headlines, the scrolling, the constant thirst for more, what would be left? What would your life look like if you showed up fully for the things that matter and stopped chasing what doesn't? That's the kind of simplicity Marcus lived for, not minimalism as aesthetic, but as a way of being, cutting through the clutter of ego, comparison, and desire until only the essential remained. He didn't own his position, he held it lightly. He didn't cling to reputation, he focused on reality. Because at the end of the day, he knew that death makes all men equal. And the only thing you truly keep is the soul you build. In the quiet of his chamber, before the city stirred, Marcus would remind himself that one day, even he, Emperor of Rome, would be forgotten. His statues would crumble, his victories would fade into dust. His name would be spoken less and less until it was no longer spoken at all. And yet, strangely, this thought didn't depress him. It liberated him. It reminded him that legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about living rightly, now, doing the next honest thing, Choosing justice when it costs you. Speaking with kindness when silence would be easier. That's what lasts, not in the history books, but in the soul. So he practiced each day like it was his last. Not in a frantic bucket list kind of way, but with attention, with presence, with care. He wrote, "Do every act of your life as though it were the very last act of your life." That wasn't a warning, it was an invitation to let urgency sharpen your values, to let mortality remind you what's worth giving your time to, because time, Marcus knew, was the only thing you never get back. What if you carried your day like it was your last? Not to squeeze more out of it, but to bring more of yourself into it. Would you speak differently, move slower, forgive faster? This awareness gave Marcus a kind of moral courage. When people around him were swept up in vanity, revenge, or greed, he stayed anchored, not because he was cold, but because he had trained himself to ask better questions. Not, what do I want right now, but what is right now? It's easy to react, to retaliate, to mirror the energy you're given. But Marcus knew that real power comes from creating your own energy, from becoming the kind of man who, no matter the chaos around him, chooses the higher road, because it is right, not because it is easy. He called on reason like a lighthouse in the storm, not to feel superior, but to keep himself from sinking. He wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And that one sentence holds a whole world of strength, because it means you are not bound to the behavior of others. You are free to respond with integrity, even when others don't. Think about the last time someone wronged you. Did you react, or did you respond? Because between those two is the space where character is built. Marcus didn't wait for peace. He created it within himself. He believed that tranquility wasn't found in circumstances, but in harmony between your values and your actions. He could be surrounded by noise, yet remain undisturbed, because his internal compass was strong. It always pointed toward virtue. Not success, not status, but virtue. And virtue to the Stoics wasn't abstract. It was action, courage, wisdom, justice, temperance. These were the pillars Marcus returned to again and again, not to appear good, but to be good, especially when nobody was watching, especially when it hurts. He asked himself hard questions. Am I being ruled by appetite or reason? Am I acting out of fear or clarity? Am I attached to outcomes or committed to what's right regardless? These weren't occasional reflections, they were daily drills. Repetition became readiness, because Marcus knew storms don't ask if you're prepared, they arrive. And when they do, it's too late to build your foundation. What's guiding your decisions when no one's watching? Is it comfort or principle, fear or virtue? Your answer to that shapes the man you're becoming. Marcus had every reason to indulge. He could have lived in luxury, surrounded by flattery, but instead, he chose a life of restraint, not because he was against pleasure, but because he knew that excess weakens the soul. He practiced temperance, eating simply, dressing plainly, avoiding gossip, because it kept him close to what was essential, and the essential, he knew, was easily lost when life became about appearances. He reminded himself, very little is needed to make a happy life. And in a world addicted to more, that kind of simplicity is rebellion. He didn't chase stimulation. He cultivated contentment. He found meaning not in the grand, but in the ground. A walk, a moment of clear thinking, a kind word given without expectation. That's the paradox of Stoicism. It leads not to dullness, but to deeper joy. Not because life is easy, but because the soul becomes strong enough to savor what is real. When was the last time you sat still? Not out of boredom, but because you were full. Not chasing more, not running, just being, present, grateful, steady. The more Marcus trained his mind, the less he needed from the world. Not because he rejected life, but because he had found something more stable within himself. He knew that to live well didn't require the world to bend to your will. It requires your will to be in harmony with nature. And nature, Marcus often wrote, is not chaotic, it is ordered. Everything has its place, even suffering, even loss. He believed that when you resist the nature of things, you suffer twice. But when you accept what is and act rightly within it, you find peace. He wasn't passive, he was aligned. He understood that freedom doesn't come from escaping responsibility, but from embracing it with grace. That true happiness doesn't come from getting what you want, but from wanting what is good. There's something almost subversive about how Marcus Aurelius lived. The world expected an emperor to dominate, to conquer, to take, but he chose instead to rule first over himself. That was the real empire, the one inside. He knew that power over others meant nothing if you couldn't master your own impulses. So he trained daily, not in politics, not in speeches, but in restraint, in humility, in observation. He reminded himself often that other people's praise or criticism were like the wind. They may rustle the surface, but they could not shake the roots unless he allowed it. And this wasn't a theory, it was tested. He led during plagues, betrayal, and war, yet still he refused to play the victim. Still, he wrote, "The universe is changing. Our life is what our thoughts make it." Even in chaos, he practiced clarity. He understood what many never do, that our mental habits shape our destiny. And if your thoughts are tangled in resentment, fear, or comparison, your life will reflect that confusion. But if your thoughts are shaped by reason, gratitude, discipline, then your outer world may stay turbulent, but your inner one remains calm. That's what Stoicism trains you to build, an inner citadel, a place that cannot be shaken. What if you stopped fighting for control of everything and started fighting for control of your focus? That one shift alone might be the door to your freedom. Marcus wrote often about returning to the present. He believed that too much dwelling on the past leads to sorrow. Too much projection into the future leads to anxiety. But the present, that was the only place where action was possible, where virtue could be practiced. He didn't ignore the future. He simply refused to live in it. And he didn't romanticize the past. He honored what it taught him, then let it go. That's not detachment. That's wisdom. Because the present moment is where the Stoic finds his leverage. It's where the hard decision is made. It's where the right word is spoken. It's where the ego is silenced and the soul speaks clearly. Marcus saw the present not as small or ordinary, but as sacred, a stage upon which a man could express his highest values, even in the smallest of actions. So here's a question worth asking. What would happen if you brought your full self to this very moment? Not tomorrow, not when things are perfect, just now, fully present, fully alive. There's a passage in Meditations where Marcus reminds himself not to be surprised when people behave badly. Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, he wrote, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? That's not a weakness, that's accountability. He knew how easy it is to point outward, to judge, to moralize, but he also knew that no real growth ever comes from blame. So he used others' flaws not as a reason to condemn, but as a mirror to correct himself. This humility wasn't performative, it was functional. It allowed him to stay focused on the one thing he could control, his own behavior, and in doing so, he became a quiet force, not by overpowering others, but by overpowering his own reactions. He wasn't swayed by flattery, wasn't sunk by slander, because he had trained his mind to come back, to reason, to principle, to what actually mattered. Imagine how much energy you'd have if you stopped reacting to everything. Imagine how much clarity you'd unlock if you paused, breathed, chose. Marcus understood that nature has seasons, and so do we. There are times to act, and times to be still, time to speak, and times to remain silent. He didn't fight those rhythms. He aligned with them. He didn't expect every day to be easy. He He expected some days to demand more than he had, but that didn't discourage him. It prepared him. He accepted pain without dramatizing it, accepted joy without clinging to it. He moved through life with a quiet rhythm: observe, accept, act, release. That rhythm is rare in our world. We're taught to cling, to control, to fear every change. But Marcus teaches a deeper way, to trust life's flow without becoming passive in it. He didn't float through life. He stood firm in it, not by resisting nature, but by cooperating with it, by doing his part and letting go of the rest. So here's a thought. What if everything happening right now, yes, even the hard things, is part of your training? Not punishment, not an accident, but necessary weight to build the soul you say you want. Marcus Aurelius didn't set out to become a legend. He didn't write for fame. He wrote for discipline, for clarity, for peace. That his words endure today is not a result of cleverness, but of sincerity. He wrote as a man trying to remember what mattered. He reminded himself daily that character is forged in the mundane, that the big moments are built upon thousands of small choices, that who you are is not what you say, but what you do when no one is looking. And he lived by that. He ruled not by fear, but by example. He didn't demand respect. He earned it by living in alignment again and again, even when it cost him. He knew that greatness is not measured by applause, but by inner harmony, by the kind of man you become in private long before the world ever sees it. Sometimes Marcus would speak to himself with brutal honesty. He didn't flatter his progress. He confronted his own laziness, his irritability, his vanity, and not to shame himself, but to stay awake, to keep the mirror clean. He wrote, "Don't go on discussing what a good person should be, just be one." That line, repeated through his pages, is not motivational fluff. It's a personal challenge, a reminder that wisdom without action is useless. That knowledge, unless lived, is just noise. He wasn't trying to win debates. He was trying to win his own attention, his own soul. Because Marcus knew the danger of distraction. Even in ancient Rome, he saw how easy it was to drift, to get caught in trivial things, to let time slip away like water through your hands. So he built a practice of coming back to what was essential, coming back to what was real, and maybe more than anything else. That's what we're missing today. A reason to come back, a structure, a compass, a code. For Marcus, that code was Stoicism, not as a theory, but as a daily lived discipline, something that anchored him when the winds of ambition or grief or fear tried to tear him off course. He came back to it not because he was weak, but because he understood that strength without direction is just chaos in disguise. When the world pulls you in 100 directions, what do you return to? If you don't have a personal code, you'll end up borrowing someone else's chaos. Marcus built his code by focusing on what he could control and releasing the rest. That wasn't apathy, that was a radical focus. He didn't try to change the behavior of others, he changed how he responded. He didn't waste energy wishing the world were different. He poured that energy into being different in the world. And in doing so, he protected something sacred, his peace. You see, peace isn't soft. It's not avoidance. It's not checking out. It's hard-won clarity, the ability to see things as they are and to choose your actions anyway. Marcus practiced that clarity even when his heart was breaking, even when friends betrayed him, even when the people he ruled turned against him. He stayed rooted, because he knew that the only way to lead others was to first lead yourself. What would happen if you led yourself the way a great leader would lead a nation, with discipline, with compassion, with responsibility for your own reactions? Even in the smallest things, Marcus believed your inner posture mattered. How you greeted someone, how you responded to inconvenience, how you thought about people you disliked. He didn't believe virtue was reserved for philosophy books. He believed it lived in traffic, in arguments, in ordinary duties. That's where character is either eroded or forged. not in theory, but in friction. He would ask himself often, "Am I behaving like someone who understands I could die today?" It wasn't morbid, it was motivating, because remembering death has a strange way of making you come alive. Suddenly, holding that grudge doesn't seem worth it. Scrolling for an hour feels like a theft of something sacred. Waiting to speak your truth becomes too costly, and all that's left is now. The only moment you can live well. If this was your last week alive, what would shift? Not out of fear, but out of reverence, out of a desire to leave nothing unlived. As Marcus aged, his writing softened, not in principle, but in tone. He became more compassionate, more forgiving, not just of others, but of himself. He saw clearly that no one is perfect, that we all stumble, that wisdom doesn't mean never falling, it means falling better, learning faster, returning quicker to what matters. He stopped trying to control outcomes. He began focusing only on effort. He stopped trying to control people. He began focusing on his example. And slowly, quietly, he became the kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly. His presence did the talking. That Stoic energy, not loud, not performative, but unmistakably grounded. You feel it when a person has nothing to prove, when their calm isn't for show, when their words come from a well, not from a script. That's who Marcus became, and that's who you can become too, not by pretending to be him, but by building your own quiet strength. One day, one principle, one breath at a time. Some evenings, Marcus would write as if whispering to his future self, not to impress him, but to steady him, not to sound wise, but to stay human. He reminded himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. That one line alone could reset a person's entire life. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being free. Because when you realize how temporary you are, you stop wasting time pretending to be permanent. You stop obsessing over the opinions of people who won't remember your name. You stop delaying your deepest convictions, waiting for a permission slip that never comes. You start living, not for legacy, but for truth. What would change if you stopped living for applause and started living for alignment? Marcus didn't need a crowd to validate his path. He had his journal, his clarity, his questions. He wasn't concerned with how others measured success. He redefined it in silence. He believed success wasn't a destination, but a daily ritual of integrity. To rise with discipline, to speak with honesty, to act with courage. Even when no one sees, especially when no one sees, because that's when the real work happens, when it's just you and you. If no one ever praised your progress, would you still pursue it? If no one clapped for your growth, would you still grow? These are the kinds of questions Marcus asked, not to torment himself, but to keep from drifting, because he knew when you don't ask better questions, you default to worse habits. And in a world filled with noise, bad habits don't look like destruction. They look like distraction. Scrolling, arguing, competing, numbing, that's how the soul erodes. Not all at once, but drip by drip. So Marcus stayed vigilant, not in fear, but in devotion. He didn't want to waste this life pretending he had another one. That's what Stoicism gave him, a structure to remember what matters, not just once, every day. Ask yourself this, what do I need to remember every day? What truth keeps me upright when the world tilts sideways? Marcus built rituals around remembering, not religious rituals, but reflective ones. A moment in the morning to set his intention. A few lines at night to examine his behavior. A pause before reacting, just long enough to ask, is this worthy of me? And that, maybe more than anything else, is the silent thread of his whole code. Living in a way that is worthy of you, not perfect, not heroic, but worthy. That's not a standard others set, it's one you define through action, because you always know, in your gut, in your chest, you know when you've betrayed your higher self. You feel it, like a tension you can't stretch away, and you know when you've honored it, even when no one saw, especially then. That's when the soul smiles back. Can you look yourself in the mirror and say, "That was worthy of me"? Marcus didn't aim for ease, he aimed for alignment. He didn't avoid discomfort, he walked through it head high, because he understood pain isn't the problem, resistance is. And when you stop resisting reality, you start learning from it. Even your enemies become teachers. Even your losses become instructions. Even your flaws become maps. That's what makes Stoicism so powerful. It doesn't require you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest, radically honest. And in that honesty, you find a kind of strength that no approval can give, and no insult can take away. So when the storms of life came, and they did, Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't harden. He didn't collapse. He remained, because he wasn't acting stoic. He had become one. There's something hauntingly beautiful about the way Marcus faced uncertainty, not with clenched fists, but with open hands. He knew he didn't control the outcomes. He only controlled his part, his effort, his choices, his attitude. That was enough. Because once you give up the illusion of control, you gain the clarity of responsibility. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What can I do with it?" You stop negotiating with fate and start collaborating with it. That's what resilience is, not toughness, but cooperation with the truth. What if the obstacle isn't in the way? What if it is the way? When Rome trembled with war, Marcus steadied himself with wisdom. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He didn't just say that. He lived it. He used setbacks as sharpeners. He used pain as a purifier. He turned every trial into a classroom, and every disappointment into the doorway, because he understood the world doesn't owe you ease. It offers you evolution, but only if you're willing to suffer wisely. Are you using your suffering to become bitter or better? Marcus lost people he loved. He lost time to illness. He lost battles. He lost sleep, but he didn't lose himself. Why? Because he didn't confuse events with identity. What happens to you is not who you are. That separation, that space between stimulus and response, is the birthplace of freedom. He practiced in that space. He protected it. He knew that reacting in anger meant surrendering his agency, and nothing was more sacred than that. He was an emperor, yes, but first he was a man who wanted peace more than power, clarity more than control, presence more than praise. Imagine if you lived like that. Would the world recognize you? Would you? That's the quiet revolution of Stoicism. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't change the world for you. It changes how you walk through it. Marcus didn't try to change Rome overnight. He changed how he showed up every day. He wasn't perfect. He got tired. He got frustrated. He made mistakes, but he kept returning to the path. And that's what separates the lost from the luminous. Not brilliance, but return. The willingness to begin again and again. Where have you abandoned your path? Where are you being called to return? Marcus believed that your character is forged not in moments of ease, but in how you carry the weight when no one helps. He never begged life to be fair. He trained himself to be strong, not the strength of muscles, but of spirit, not to dominate others, but to dominate the chaos within. That's what his journal was, a gym for the soul. He trained there daily, reps of reflection, sets of silence, discipline in thought. So when the storm came, when Rome shook, he didn't collapse. He centered. He walked forward not because he had the answers, but because he trusted the direction. Do you need certainty to move, or can you trust the compass of your character? When the night was quiet and the palace halls empty, Marcus would write under candlelight. No crown, no armor, just a man alone with his thoughts. He wasn't crafting history, he was crafting himself. And in doing so, he left behind something eternal. Not his rule, not his armies, but his example. A quiet fire that still burns, in pages passed down from hand to hand, not to impress us, but to invite us. to sit beside him, to ask the same questions, to return to ourselves. That's the legacy of a Stoic. Not fame, but flame, lit from within. Marcus didn't fear death. He rehearsed it, not in a morbid way, but in a liberating one. Each morning he reminded himself, you could leave life right now, not to create panic, but to create presence. Because when you carry the weight of death gently on your shoulder, you stop wasting time pretending you're immortal. You start speaking the truth faster. You forgive quicker. You stop chasing applause and start living in alignment. That's what memento mori means. Not fear the end, but respect the moment. What would change if you lived with death in your periphery, not as an enemy, but as a teacher? Marcus saw time as his most sacred currency. He wrote, you act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. We fear pain, judgment, and failure, but we desire endlessly, as if we'll never run out of days. He flipped that script. He fasted from distractions. He stripped away what wasn't essential. He didn't want to do more. He wanted to be more. He asked, is this necessary? A question you could tattoo on every calendar, because your life is not made of years, it's made of yeses. Each one shapes who you become. What are you saying yes to that is slowly eroding who you are? Marcus was a philosopher in a palace, a soldier of the mind. He knew that his biggest battle wasn't against enemies or barbarians, it was against his own impulses. He said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That's not just a quote, it's a revolution. Most men are ruled by circumstances, a red light, a rude comment, a lost deal, a canceled plan. The world moves and they fall apart. But Marcus? He trained his center to remain. He was calm within chaos, a still lake in a storm of ego, ambition, and distraction. And that calmness, that was his strength. When was the last time you sat still, not out of boredom, but to build that strength? He didn't avoid discomfort. He walked into it. He knew that virtue wasn't created in comfort. It was carved, like marble, by hardship. He said, just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. Not whether people notice, not whether it's profitable, not whether it feels good, just that it's right. That principle guided him more than popularity ever could. That's what made him rare. Because most men seek a throne. He sought integrity. He ruled not by force, but by example. And his empire was his inner life. What kind of empire are you building, and what rules it? Marcus aged, like we all do. His beard grew gray, his body grew frail, but his clarity only sharpened, because the less he held on to, the lighter he became. He let go of resentment, of control, of illusions. He stripped away everything that wasn't him, and in doing so, revealed the essence of a man who had nothing to prove and everything to give. That's the Stoic paradox. The more you release, the more you receive. Not from the world, but from within. What are you still gripping that needs to be grieved or released? Some say Stoicism is cold, that it kills emotion, but Marcus loved deeply. He grieved deeply. He just refused to be enslaved by it. He didn't banish emotion, he disciplined it. Like a wild horse, he didn't shoot it. He learned to ride it. That's emotional maturity, not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of response. He cried when his children died. He mourned when his friends passed. But he didn't drown, because he had trained his soul to breathe beneath sorrow. That's not a weakness, that's wisdom. When life breaks you, will your foundation hold? Or have you built your strength only on sunny days? Marcus wasn't perfect, and he never claimed to be, but that's what made his words ring with such honesty. He was just like us, a man with a job, a man with pressure, a man with doubt. But instead of collapsing under it, he converted pressure into clarity, and he used every moment, every failure, every ache, every insult as a chisel, carving himself from the inside out. until what was left was someone the world couldn't shake, not because he had it all, but because he needed less. That is what it means to live with virtue, to rise without rising above, to lead without needing to be seen, to suffer without losing your soul, to die not full of regrets but full of presence. Of all the moments Marcus Aurelius wrote by candlelight, wrestling silently with his own soul, none carried more weight than those shaped by the awareness of death. Not in the grim, fearful way we often imagine it, but as a sharpening blade that slices away distraction, vanity, and the illusion of permanence. For Marcus, death was not a punishment or a tragedy. It was a teacher, a patient, ever-present mentor, whispering, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." That one idea could reset your entire life. In the morning rush, amid traffic, phone notifications, deadlines, what if you remembered, "I am mortal, and this hour will not return"? Suddenly, you're not irritated by the slow driver in front of you. You're not anxiously comparing yourself to others online. You're just here, fully. You breathe deeper. You speak with more care. You choose your battles wisely. You forgive faster, because you remember how fragile and finite it all is. Marcus didn't write about death to scare himself into obedience. He used it to awaken his senses, to heighten his gratitude, his clarity. "Don't act as if you were going to live 10,000 years, he wrote. And yet we so often do. We postpone the truth. We delay kindness. We procrastinate our own peace. We act as if time owes us more, but it doesn't, and he knew that. In his daily meditations, Marcus often returned to the thought, "You are a soul carrying a corpse." That's not to diminish the body, but to remind us that beneath the flesh, the aches, the aging, lies something more enduring, our character, our will, our reason, and we must attend to that soul the way a soldier sharpens his blade before battle. Without reflection, without presence, we drift through life half asleep, haunted by regrets, or paralyzed by what hasn't even happened. Now, let's stop for a second and look around us. Imagine you're in a room filled with clocks, each one ticking at a slightly different rhythm. Some are fast, some slow. One of them is yours, and you don't know when it will stop. That's not a reason to panic. It's a reason to pay attention, to live, really live, in the present rhythm of your own life. So Marcus lived with urgency, not frantic, panicked motion, but noble urgency. He governed an empire, yes, but more importantly, he governed himself. He woke each morning not for power, but for practice. The practice of virtue, of stillness, of honest effort. He didn't always succeed. He failed, he slipped, he doubted himself. But he always returned. Return. That was his unspoken 11th principle. When you fall short, return. When you're angry, return to reason. When you're scattered, return to the breath. Return to now, because the Stoic path isn't about perfection, it's about presence. Think about your own life for a moment. How much of it is lived by habit, by reaction, by inertia? What would change if you lived with the weight of your mortality in your back pocket, not to fear it, but to feel it? To let it wake you up from the long sleep of busyness and bring you back to what matters. One of the most misunderstood ideas in Stoicism is that it's cold, that it suppresses emotion, kills passion, rejects joy. But Marcus didn't reject emotion, he refined it. He didn't kill desire, he redirected it toward wisdom, justice, courage. He didn't deny grief, he just refused to be broken by it. He lost children, he lost friends, he lost time, and still, he wrote, "Accept everything which happens, even if it seems disagreeable, because it leads to the health of the universe." That level of trust, of acceptance, is not passivity. It's not a resignation. It's the hardest thing a human being can do, to stay soft in the heart, while remaining unshakable and in the soul. So what can you do with that? In the quiet space between today's noise and tomorrow's uncertainty, you can do what Marcus did. You can wake up early, not just physically, but spiritually. You can examine your mind, challenge your impulses, and act from your deepest values. You can face discomfort not with resentment but with readiness. You can treat every encounter, no matter how small, as an opportunity to live out your code, not someone else's code, yours, rooted in integrity, in clarity, in purpose, in something you chose, not something you inherited from the chaos of modern life. It won't be easy. Some days your mind will resist. The world will seduce you with urgency, noise, anger, but you will remember, because Marcus taught us, that tranquility is not the absence of storm. It's the eye of it. You will not fight for peace. You will be at peace. And when the day ends, you will sit as he did with your journal. You'll ask yourself, what did I do well? Where did I fall short? What can I do better tomorrow? Not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself, because reflection is the first step toward freedom. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped running from discomfort and started leaning into it? If you stopped waiting for the world to calm down and instead became calm within it? That is the heart of Stoic life. Not rigid, not cold, not superior, just real, just awake. Marcus Aurelius didn't leave behind an empire of gold. He left behind pages of thought, inked in solitude, meant not to impress, but to remind. Remind us of who we are when we strip away fear, pride, and illusion. When we return to the core, reason, virtue, presence. That's the daily code, not a rule book, but a compass. And every morning it quietly asks, will you live according to it or drift further from yourself? You already know the answer. Marcus knew that adversity was not something to be avoided. It was something to be transformed. He saw it not as an enemy, but as a tool, like the sculptor who needs the hammer to shape the marble, or the blacksmith who uses fire to forge the blade. The pressure, the heat, the unexpected blows from life. These were invitations to rise, not reasons to collapse. There's something profoundly liberating about this shift in perspective. Imagine you're driving down a mountain road and a storm rolls in. Fog blurs your view, rain batters the windshield, and fear tightens your grip on the wheel. But if, in that very moment, you remembered that every difficulty is a forge for your inner clarity, how differently might you respond? This wasn't just theory to Marcus, it was how he lived. When the Antonine Plague devastated Rome, killing millions, including members of his own household, he didn't flee or freeze. He stayed. He wrote, he led. And he reminded himself, if it's endurable, then endure it. If it's not, then stop complaining. Your end will come either way. You could call that morbid, but really, it's just radically clear-eyed. He didn't waste time fantasizing about an easier world. He trained himself to face the one he was in, and to do so with courage. And that courage wasn't loud, it was quiet. The kind that wakes up at 5 a.m. to keep a promise. The kind that apologizes sincerely, or walks away from noise to preserve dignity. The kind that doesn't need applause. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in silence, not trying to escape the storm inside, but simply listening to it, learning from it, standing still while it passed through you? Sometimes the most powerful move isn't to fix, but to feel. And so Marcus returned again and again to one vital question. What is in my control? He called it the chief task of life, knowing what belongs to you and what doesn't. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Because once you really understand what's not up to you, the past, the opinions of others, the unpredictable chaos of the world, you're free. You stop wasting energy on wind and waves. You start steering your own ship. There was one particular entry in Meditations where he reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. This isn't motivational fluff, it's a spiritual blueprint. Imagine living every day like that. Your car breaks down, not your fault, but your response. That's you. Someone betrays your trust, their choice. But how do you protect your peace afterward? That's within your realm. Modern life, especially in America, seems obsessed with control, managing everything, mastering outcomes, optimizing every second. But Marcus whispers from 2,000 years ago, true control lies in surrendering to what you can't command and showing up fully for what you can. Here's a thought. What if every annoyance, every delay, every twist in your day was a training ground for your inner posture? What if the world isn't here to please you, but to strengthen you? And that strength, it's not always about big heroics. Sometimes it's in the restraint. In the moment you choose not to retaliate. In the pause before you speak. In the breath you take instead of the insult you deliver. Marcus was emperor of Rome, yes. But the greater empire he ruled was within. He believed that self-mastery was the ultimate freedom. That's why even as others around him crumbled under pressure, he stood firm. And it wasn't because life was easier for him. If anything, it was harder. His reign was marked by betrayal, war, sickness, and loss. Yet through it all, he kept writing, not for glory, not for power, but to remember who he wanted to be. And maybe that's the most stoic thing of all, not pretending you're perfect, but being humble enough to return every single day to the path, to recommit to wisdom, to courage, to discipline, to live not for applause, but for alignment, to show up as the man your principles would be proud of, even when no one's watching. So pause for a second. Ask yourself, if someone read your journal 1,000 years from now, what would they see? Would your daily thoughts reflect fear, distraction, egoism, or depth, clarity, and intention? You are writing your code every single day. Sometimes we think greatness is about being unshakable, untouchable, emotionless. But Marcus Aurelius didn't buy into that illusion. He wasn't a marble statue, he was a man. And that's exactly why his words strike so deep. Because he felt, and still chose calm. Because he doubted, and still chose discipline. Because he feared, and still chose the path of wisdom. He didn't preach detachment in the way we misunderstand it today. He didn't shut himself off from people or pretend to be above pain. In fact, he loved deeply. He grieved the deaths of his children. He struggled with the failings of friends. But he believed in a deeper kind of detachment, the kind that says, even if my heart breaks, I will not let bitterness rot it. Even if I fall, I will rise with more grace. It was this tenderness beneath his strength that made him powerful. And it's the same tenderness modern men are often taught to suppress. We're told to harden, to numb, to grind. But Marcus offered something bolder, to stay soft inside and strong enough to carry that softness without fear. Ask yourself this. Could you be a man whose power doesn't come from dominance but from presence? Could you be the kind of man who doesn't need to be loud to be heard, who doesn't need to win every argument to feel secure? Could you be like Marcus, anchored, aware, unshaken? He once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Those words hit like a thunderclap because they strip away every excuse. You don't need more time. You don't need more advice. You don't need perfect circumstances. You just need to choose. To choose to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. To choose to pause, even when your pride wants to react. To choose to keep going, even when your motivation fades. This is not about becoming a saint. It's about being sovereign over yourself. Marcus didn't wait for the world to calm down. He created calm within. He didn't ask for justice from everyone around him. He acted justly himself. He didn't demand loyalty. He embodied loyalty. That's the power of living by a code. You stop trying to change the weather, and you build shelter in your soul. And if you're wondering, how do I start? You already have. Because the moment you start paying attention to the direction of your life, the shape of your thoughts, the quality of your actions, you've begun the journey. Don't wait for a breakdown to make you reflect. Don't wait for loss to make you appreciate it. Don't wait for a crisis to wake you up. Let today be the day you write your own code, not in ink, but in how you show up, in the silence of your decisions, in the echo of your discipline. Because the truth is, the world doesn't need more men chasing pleasure, validation, or ease. It needs more men rooted in purpose. men who lead themselves before they lead others, men who, like Marcus, quietly conquer kingdoms within. There's a passage in Meditations that often goes unnoticed, but it contains one of the most profound Stoic truths. Marcus wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." It sounds simple, almost too simple, but within it lies an entire philosophy of integrity. He wasn't talking about being perfect. He was talking about alignment, about living in such a way that your actions, words, and inner compass are not at war with one another. So many modern men are exhausted not because they work too hard, but because they live in contradiction. They say things they don't mean. They act against their values to impress people they don't respect. They lie to avoid confrontation. They betray themselves in small, subtle ways, and those betrayals add up, and eventually they begin to feel like strangers in their own skin. Marcus saw through that illusion. He knew that true strength wasn't about force, it was about harmony, doing the right thing not because someone's watching, but because your soul demands it. Speaking the truth not because it's easy, but because your inner freedom depends on it. Ask yourself, what if you stopped negotiating with your values? What if your word was law, not just to others, but to yourself? What would that kind of self-trust create in your life? This is how Marcus led Rome, not through grand speeches, but through quiet consistency. His presence spoke more than his commands. His discipline radiated without needing display. He was powerful because he was centered. In one entry, he reminds himself, just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. It sounds almost reckless in a world obsessed with outcomes, but that's the Stoic reversal. We are not in control of results, only our process, our effort, our intention. The reward is not in applause or recognition, but in the peace that comes from knowing you stayed true. That's what made Marcus a rare kind of leader, not perfect, not invincible, but steady, quiet, unmoved by flattery, unshaken by insults. He wasn't trying to be remembered, he was trying to be worthy. And in the end, that's what Stoicism offers. Not a promise that life will be easy, but that your soul can be unbreakable. That even if the storms rage, your foundation holds. That even if the world misunderstands you, you understand yourself. So when you read Marcus today, you're not just reading a dead emperor's journal, you're reading the voice of a man who walked through darkness and chose clarity, who had every reason to complain but chose gratitude, who bore burdens in silence but never stopped seeking virtue. And if he could do that, surrounded by power, temptation, betrayal, and decay, then what excuse do we have? There's a moment, often in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world feels still, when the noise of the day hasn't yet begun, and all you hear is your own breath, your own heartbeat. That's when the truth becomes clearest. Nothing is guaranteed, not the next breath, not the next sunrise, and certainly not the people or possessions we cling to like they're eternal. Marcus Aurelius knew this well. Each day he reminded himself of death, not to be morbid, not to fall into despair, but to sharpen his awareness of life. You could leave life right now, he wrote. Let that determine what you do and say and think. It wasn't a threat, it was liberation. A Stoic doesn't fear death, he walks alongside it. Because once you realize life is fleeting, everything trivial begins to fall away. He would walk the halls of his palace, not as an emperor above men, but as a student of time, watching servants come and go, seeing generals age, holding his own son's small hand, knowing one day that hand would grow old or perhaps never get the chance. And in that awareness, he found power, not power over others, but power over the self. The power to live each day with fullness, without illusion, without wasting a second. We don't like thinking about mortality, but look around. Every wrinkle on your parents' face, every fading photograph, every closed chapter in your own life. They are all gentle reminders. This won't last. So what will you do with the time you have? Imagine you're holding sand in your hand. The tighter you grip it, the more it slips through your fingers. Life is the same. The Stoic path isn't about control, it's about graceful letting go. So ask yourself, what are you gripping too tightly? Marcus practiced this by letting go each morning. He stripped down his expectations and attachments like a warrior removes armor before sleep. He reminded himself, fame is nothing, praise is noise, pain is just a sensation, death is nature, and everything I possess can vanish in a breath. This wasn't nihilism. It was freedom from dependence. When you no longer fear loss, you begin to live with unmatched strength. And this strength, it's quiet. It doesn't scream in boardrooms or parade itself on social media. It breathes in the man who faces hardship with still eyes. It whispers through the woman who mourns without self-pity. It lives in the father who forgives, the soldier who doesn't break, the nurse who shows up one more day even though her heart is breaking inside. In a modern world obsessed with permanence, perfect skin, eternal youth, viral legacies, the Stoic chooses the opposite, impermanence as a teacher. The Stoic sees beauty in the falling leaves, in gray hair, in goodbye hugs. Because all of these whisper the same truth Marcus embraced daily. Nothing is yours, not forever. So hold it with grace and let it go with even more. Every day, Marcus wrote his meditations not for publication, not to become immortal through words, but as reminders to himself. Notes from a man who ruled the known world, yet sought mastery only over his mind. He faced betrayal, illness, grief, and pressure we'll never comprehend. And still, he practiced gentleness. He wrote, he walked, he breathed, not to change the world, but to remain unshaken within it. What if the real measure of your strength isn't how much you've achieved, but how calm you remain when everything you love could disappear tomorrow? This is where Stoicism ends, not in answers, but in a deeper question. Are you living in alignment with what truly matters? Because when you are, even death is no longer something to dread. It becomes simple, the final note in a beautiful, fleeting song. There's a garden deep in the mind of a Stoic, quiet, overgrown, not with weeds, but with thoughts. It is not trimmed for perfection, nor meant for display. It's where stillness grows, where wild acceptance mingles with self-restraint, where every fallen petal is not a loss, but a cycle, and every breeze reminds the soul you are not in control, but you are always responsible. Marcus Aurelius tended to this inner garden every single day, not with ambition, not with hope of reward, but because he knew the world outside is chaotic, but the garden within, that is where peace lives. And so he wrote, like water carving stone, shaping himself one line at a time, not to become someone else, but to return to who he already was beneath the noise. We often think power is loud, that to be unshaken means to resist. But Marcus teaches something gentler. Real power is in yielding, not out of weakness, but wisdom. When a storm comes, the brittle tree breaks, but the reed bends and survives. In the final winters of his life, as his body failed and his breath shortened, Marcus no longer clung to any image of greatness. He simply asked himself, is my soul still mine? That is the Stoic's ultimate question. Not how long you lived or how loudly, but how deeply, how honestly, how in alignment. He had walked among gods and men, among traitors and friends, and yet at the end, he walked alone. Not in loneliness, but in wholeness. Because the one who walks with themselves is never truly alone. So if you were to sit beside him now as the sun set over the Roman horizon, he wouldn't give you advice. He wouldn't ask about your goals or your pain. He'd sit quietly. He might place a hand on your shoulder, point to the fading light, and simply whisper, "This too passes, let it go." And in that moment, you'd understand. Everything you're afraid of losing was never truly yours. The only thing you ever owned was your response, your breath, your choices, your stillness. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it always was.